Hello, my name is Divya Supin and I am a faculty of Biological Sciences. I am here to take a lecture on the fundamental unit of life, the cell. Let's start. Fundamental unit of life is cell. So what do you mean by fundamental unit? Fundamental unit is the basic structure that is needed to, to make a bigger structure. So that basic structure that is required for making of a living body is the cell. Hence, cell is known as the fundamental unit of life. So, cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life. Cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life. So, what does this mean? This means that all living organisms are made up of this basic structure called the cell. So we learned that cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life. It is the fundamental unit of life, and all living organisms are made up of this basic structure, which we call it as cell. So let's see from where the term cell came. Actually, Robert Hooke in the year 1665, while observing the bark of cork, observed tiny structures that resembled a honeycomb like structure. That is, it looked like small rooms. So in Latin, the term used for small rooms is cellula. So from that term, the term cell came. A cell means a small room or a small compartment. Robert Hooke in 1665, while observing the bark of a cork tree, found tiny compartments within the bark of the cork tree. So he found the tiny compartments, and these tiny compartments in Latin was known as cellula, and he termed it as cell. So that is the origin of the term cell. So Robert Hooke was the first to observe cells, and that was from the from the bark of a cork tree, and they were dead cells, hence it had tiny compartments which were empty, and these tiny compartments in Latin were known as cellula, and it was later termed as cell. Later in 1674, Leeuwenhoek observed living cells. So that is the history behind the discovery of cell. Robert Hooke in 1665 discovered cell from the bark of a cork tree, and he found tiny compartments in it like honeycomb structures, and these tiny compartments in Latin were known as cellula, and from that cellula term, the term coined cell. In 1674, Leeuwenhoek observed living cells from pond water. So what was used for observing all this? Can we observe these cells with the naked eye? No, of course not. At the time of Robert Hooke, he used a simple type of microscope. That is the modern term used, but it wasn't a microscope, it was a simple crude version of microscope, a crude type, some primitive type of microscope. And later a more magnification power was used by Leeuwenhoek, and he observed the living cells from the pond water sample. So based on the types of cells, there are two types of organisms, that is unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. So what do you mean by unicellular organisms? Unicellular means those organisms that are having only a single cell, and multicellular organisms contains more cells. So examples of single celled organism or unicellular organisms are amoeba, paramecium, bacteria, then chlamydomonas, which is an algae, then yeast, which is a fungi. These are examples of unicellular organisms, whereas multicellular organisms contains more cell, that is more than one cell, and they include all the plants and animals that we see around us are examples of multicellular organisms. Now let's see the structure of a cell in detail. This is the plant cell. So how can you differentiate a plant cell and animal cell, that we will see in detail. So the structures that defines the plant cell are an outer covering called the cell wall. Then within the cell wall there is the cell membrane, or it is known as the plasma membrane. Then enclosing the cell membrane we have the cytoplasm, a jelly like substance. It is a matrix, it is known as the cytoplasm, and within the cytoplasm there is a large vacuole. This is the vacuole, and to the side of the cell we can see a prominent part, that is the nucleus. Then we have green chloroplast that contains the chlorophyll that gives the green color to the plants. Then the powerhouse of the cell, that is the mitochondria, or in singular we call it as mitochondrion. Then we have the endoplasmic reticulum, or in simpler terms known as ER, in which you can find some dot-like structures. These are the ribosomes attached to it. So the based on the presence of ribosomes on the endoplasmic reticulum is of two types. One is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and the other is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum contains the ribosomes, and the ribosomes are the sites of protein synthesis. Then it is the Golgi bodies or the Golgi apparatus. So these are the cell organelles. So the structures that are found within the cell are known as cell organelles. What are they known as? Cell organelles. So the cell organelles include chloroplast, then mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and we have the nucleus, and within a large vacuole. Then it is embedded in the jelly-like matrix called the cytoplasm, and this cytoplasm is enclosed with the cytoplasmic membrane or plasma membrane, and an outer hard covering of cellulose called the cell wall is present in the plant cell. This is the basic structure of a plant cell. We have to learn all these structures in detail, that we will learn later. So, let us see how a animal cell is different from a plant cell. So, this is the animal cell. How is an animal cell different from a plant cell? In plant cell we saw that it was enclosed by a double layered structure, and that double layered consists of the cell membrane as well as the cell wall. But in case of animal cell we have only the cell membrane. What is the other name of cell membrane? It is the plasma membrane. So, within the cell membrane we have this jelly-like matrix, as we have seen in this plant cell. It is the cytoplasm, and we have at the center a prominent nucleus, and we have other cell organelles like the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. Then we have small vacuoles. We knew that in plant cell we had large vacuoles. Plant cell had large vacuoles, but in the animal cell we have only small vacuoles. And then we have the endoplasmic reticulum, that is the connecting network. Then the Golgi bodies are also present. Then a demarcating structure that is present in the animal cell is the centrosomes or the centrioles. So, what are these? The centrioles help in the cell division. These structures are absent in the plant cell. So, what is the major difference between a plant cell and an animal cell? If we see that the plant cell has cell wall and animal cell lack a cell wall. Then there is chloroplast present in the plant cells, whereas in the animal cell chloroplast is not present. And we have the larger vacuoles in plant cell, whereas small vacuoles are present in the animal cells. Then lysosomes is present. Lysosomes are present both in the plant cell and the animal cell. They are the suicidal bags. So, these are the important structures or the cell organelles that are present within the animal cell. Hope you understood the difference between the plant cell and animal cell, and how cell is an important part of a living body. So, let us discuss in more about the primitive type of cell and the advanced type of cell, that is the prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell, in the later session.